Okay. One day, after Moses had grown up, we'll find out later he's 40 years old here. He went out to where his own. So we skipped 40 years of his life. I mean, all of his Egyptian years we just skipped from verse 2, chapter 2, verse 10. Between verses 10 and 11, chapter 2, we just completely skipped the 40 years he spent as a prince of Egypt. Moses apparently, when he wrote this all down later on in time, did not find that worth mentioning. We can read in Josephus some more information about Moses, which, Josephus, well, you can say what you want about his credibility, but his story, his information about Moses stands to, I'm sorry, there's cats around here, stands to, reason about what a prince of Egypt would have been doing during this time. He apparently was a general in the army and had undertaken an expedition down to Ethiopia to suppress some rebellion there or whatever. And while he was there, he came away with an Ethiopian wife, the princess or whatever, one of the daughters of the king of that area, that was swooned over him, and they made a peace deal. It's just, that involved him marrying this princess. And that would have been in his late 30s. And now he's 40. And he's probably in line to be the next pharaoh. And probably is out scouting the land, so to speak, about the land that he's in line to rule again at some point. One of the things also, I'll have to come back next time with a future video. I'll have to confirm some of these details more specifically. Right now, off the top of my head, I don't trust myself to recall them accurately. But one of the clues that we can have in terms of trying to figure out how to fit Moses into Egypt and all that is looking into, okay, where do we have a long-lasting pharaoh with a lack of descendants or a lack of sons, a pharaoh's daughter that didn't have sons, because she got the son out of the water instead of having her own. So it's, trying to one of the ways that we can kind of look for clues about where Moses fits into the story of Egypt is, where do the palace condition. First of all, the palace of Egypt needs to be in the north, which is where the Israelites were. I mentioned before how Egypt was separated into two major areas, the north and the south. Upper Egypt, because the elevation was higher, remember the Nile River runs north. So Upper Egypt was in the south, Lower Egypt was in the north. And the Israelites were living in the north Egypt, in the delta, in the Mediterranean Sea, and the Pharaoh's capital during this time period was there, very near there. We saw the Pharaoh's daughter going out to Nile River to bathe, close to where Moses' basket was, and we will see. We haven't gotten there yet, but we will see later on when Moses and Aaron are having their encounters with Pharaoh that they're just going back and forth between Pharaoh's capital and the Israelite place regularly, like on a daily basis, or close to it. So, the Egyptian capital moved around. Sometimes it was in Thebes, Memphis, Cairo, kind of all over Egypt. But at this point in time, it was in northern Egypt, very near to where the Israelites were. And so, finding out, which pharaohs reigned from a northern capital or northern palace, where that capital might have been. That's how we can kind of find, a spot for Moses to exist in during Egyptian history. Again, though, if we go straight by our timeline, which again, our timeline is just our timeline. Like, there's nothing historical about that. That's just our timeline. That's just a construct or an edifice that we have built to help us understand the historical data that we've collected. But there's nothing saying that our timeline has to be right, other than just we want it to be right. We believe I'm very concerned about you. You're in one of your moods. You know, we have this need to be academically right or intelligently superior, and so we believe that we have dated Egyptian. We have constructed this timeline of Egyptian history that we hold to, essentially because we want to be right about it. We don't really want to go back and confront the possibility that we may be wrong about it. If you don't believe that this can be an attitude that our scholars and our smart people can have, again, just look at COVID in this last year. We have been right about almost nothing when it comes to COVID. We say one thing and then we find out a few months later that's totally wrong. We believe one thing and we realize, well, that's wrong. You know, we spent 16 months, we spent most of the last year and a half completely denying and even refusing to acknowledge the possibility that COVID may have come from a lab. Not because there was any particular strong evidence or proof to demonstrate that it didn't, but because we just didn't want to believe it. We didn't want it to come from a lab. We didn't want to believe that could be true. So for 16 solid months, we just refused to talk about it. We refused to acknowledge it. We refused to investigate it. We refused to have an honest discussion about it. For no other reason than we just did not want to believe it. We did not want that to be true. So if you really believe that human beings are enlightened white European scholars, which are smarter than everybody else has ever lived, according to them at least, if you really believe that these people can have these if you really want to believe these people don't have these kinds of blind spots, they do. I mean, they do. Okay, you know, we have constructed this timeline of Egyptian history over the course of the last 100+ years of studying Egyptian records, and we've used that to date history in all the other nations of the ancient world too. And we may be wrong about it. Okay, you know, the Egyptians themselves didn't record their history that way. They didn't, like Thutmose, one of the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty, did not say, okay, I reigned from the years 1470 to 1429 BC or whatever his years are supposed to be. See, Thutmose would be the pharaoh whose reign, according to our timeline, happened when it falls right into the time period when the Exodus happens. So if our timeline is correct, he should be the pharaoh of the Exodus. He's not, so our timeline is not correct. But rather than acknowledging that our timeline is not correct, we just say, well, the Exodus didn't happen then. You know, like that's how we respond. It's typical white European Enlightenment arrogance, but again, we don't want to believe that about ourselves, so we don't say that we're arrogant, we just say that we're right. So anyway, Moses is 40 here, although his age isn't given until later. 40 years old. You know, I'm not yet 40 even to this day. So in my position, equating myself to Moses, I would still be a prince of Egypt at this point. 40 years is a long time. You know, I've been around long enough now that I feel like I've seen quite a bit. I'm not going to say I've seen it all. I'm not 80, for example. But I'm not even 40, actually. I'm close, but I'm not even 40 yet. But I've still been around a while. I've seen a lot. And it's weird to me. I think of it in the sense of, man, if I were in Moses' position, I still would be a prince of Egypt. This wouldn't have happened to me yet. I'd still be between Exodus 2:10, Exodus 2:11. That's how long this is, you know. 40 years as a prince of Egypt is a pretty long time. That would have affected his education. That would have affected his upbringing. You know, he would have been able to read and write in the Egyptian hieroglyphics as well as the Proto-Syrian alphabet. He would have known all of the myths and all of the history of Egypt, in addition to his own people's history. Which I believe he would have known that too. I mean, he was raised by his mother, at least for a certain period of time. Then he's going to leave here and spend 40 years out in the desert, and he's going to be exposed to more stuff there. It's quite a background, quite a life. Moses essentially was trained for 80 years so that he could lead for 40 years, as it turned out. One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. Actually, you know what? Let's start a new video.